to position previews. And next up, Shortstop. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Monday, February 10th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, it's our 2025 Shortstop preview. We'll talk some strategy, deep dive the top 12 at ADP, sleepers, breakouts, busts, and our favorites to draft, and much more. But guys, the Super Bowl is over. We have no idea what happened.
What an amazing game.
Days in advance.
That was crazy.
You know what that means? It's officially Fantasy Baseball SZN. Get hyped.
That's how the kids say season for all our olds in the audience. Scott, that's how the kids say season.
I don't think they're kids anymore. I think they've grown up. And I think the actual kids are saying something completely different we're not aware of yet.
They're always kids, forever young.
Well, it's officially Fantasy Baseball season. Let's talk about shortstops, the crown jewel of the infield. There are 5 shortstop eligible players going in the top 14 picks of ADP right now. Bobby Witt Jr., Elly De La Cruz, Gunnar Henderson, Mookie Betts, and Francisco Lindor. The position is really strong until it's not. Chris, what are your thoughts on shortstop this season?
Yeah, there's a drop-off at shortstop. And I would say when I look at the ADP, it's like right around 11, maybe 12.
At shortstop?
I think that's where the first tier is. Yeah.
Oh, well, come on. Let's not bury the lead here. After complaining about the lack of options at catcher, first base, second base, and to some degree third base, shortstop is an embarrassment of riches.
To a certain extent, but Ezekiel Tovar is the number 12 player in ADP at shortstop.
but just because people sorted incorrectly when they draft doesn't mean we should say, I agree, Ezekiel Tovar, I have him 19th in my ranking, but the fact that some people can have him 12th and some people can have him 19th speaks to how much depth there is at this position. I have, the way I break it down in my shortstop strategies article, I have 8 studs. I have 11 deserving starters. And then I have those 19 were 19 into the position at that point. And I have not included Xavier Edwards, Mason Wynn, Carlos Correa, Tyler Fitzgerald, Trevor Story, Ha-Seong Kim. I'm classifying all of those as sleepers. So in a deep roto league, the 15-team roto leagues that all the high rollers like to play, of course, there will come a point in the draft when shortstop runs out, just like every position will run out at some point. But if you play in a normie league with normal-minded people, you don't have to try to get a quality starter at shortstop.
I will say, even in a 12-team league, there aren't enough of the high-end options to go around. It does run out of the difference makers. Yeah.
There's 8, and only one of them is multi-eligible. And I'm not including Oneil Cruz in those 8.
The first 5 that are going in the top 15 picks, it's really just dependent on what pick you have in the first round, whether or not you're going to wind up with one of those elite shortstops. So you're kind of at the mercy of your draft slot there. But of all the infield positions, again, this is the crown jewel, the elite talent that we see at the top of this position. I think that there are very clear drop-offs just in terms of ADP tiers, because you see after Willy Adames, who's the 10th shortstop off the board, there's a 40 pick drop down to Matt McLain, and then there's 2 more round drop down to Bo Bichette, who we'll talk a lot about.
Well, yeah, that drop only happens because everybody's decided Bo Bichette is dead.
Well, and I do think that speaks to the depth at the position, because I kept hammering home that number 8, but I wasn't including Oneil Cruz, who of course is a exit velocity maven who could turn the game upside down if he could smooth out his rough edges. I'm not including Willy Adames, who was a top 15 overall player last year. I'm not including him among the 8. I'm not including among the 8.
Are you including Abrams?
I am, at least in roto, but it's borderline. It's a fine line between CJ Abrams and Oneil Cruz, I understand, but I think that fine line comes down to about 15 to 20 steals. So I do think Abrams is deserving of special distinction over Cruz, even though, Cruz has that huge upside that he may still tap into. I don't want overlook that possibility. I'm not including Matt McLain in the 8, even though on a per game basis, he was certainly a stud 2 years ago. I'm not including Bichette in the 8, even though for most of his career, he's been regarded as an early rounder. So I think shortstop is the deepest, by far the deepest infield position in terms of studs. And then even the non-studs includes several players who in the recent past have been studs and could certainly be studs again.
Yeah, I think the biggest way to illustrate this is Xander Bogaerts is 15th in NFBC ADP at shortstop. He's 9th at second base.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good call. Scott, do you have a specific strategy that you are looking to do at shortstop, or based on what you said, is it just whoever falls in your lap at the right part of the draft?
So the way it breaks down this year, just the distribution of talent across positions. There are weak positions, there are strong positions. But I don't find myself being all that intentional about what position I take when, because I feel like things kind of distribute fairly. Even though there are weaker positions, like when you get into the weak stage of a position, there are a lot of choices within that weak stage that are pretty similar. So it's not like I'm intentionally avoiding shortstop early because I'm so scared of missing out on a second baseman or a first baseman or whatever. Like if Francisco Lindor falls in my lap early in round 2, or Trea Turner's there at the end of round 3, which sometimes happens incredibly, like I've got to take them, obviously. And it's more an acknowledgement that it's likely I'll be filling my utility spot with a shortstop, or let's say that doesn't happen. Let's say nobody falls in my lap early, and at the point CJ Abrams and Oneil Cruz are going off the board, I still don't have a shortstop. Well, I know how late Bichette goes, and I still have a lot of faith in Bo. Like that's if I'm drafting in a perfect world where I'm maximizing the value of every pick, Bichette is who I'm getting. But I'm not passing up an obvious pick early so that I can get Bichette, because I could still get Bichette anyway, to play utility or middle infield or whatever.
Well, that's the thing is, you're probably going to end up starting at least 2 shortstops in a roto league, if not 3, maybe 4. Yeah. It's entirely possible.
And even if I get totally burned and I miss out on the early ones, I'm drafting with Chris and he reaches in and takes Bichette before I have the chance.
Which happens pretty much every time.
It's still probably okay.
Yeah.
Because I can still get a Zach Neto and plug in somebody like Mason Wynn or Tyler Fitzgerald or even Carlos Correa. I could pair up Correa and Neto and I'll probably be fine. There's enough. In addition to all the high-end talent, there's a lot of upsidey fallback options here too that makes it so there's just it feels like the most worry-free position to me, except when you get into those really deep leagues where at some point the talent runs out everywhere, like I said.
All right. Before we take our first break, a reminder to subscribe to the FBT newsletter if you haven't already. CBSSports.com/newsletters. Chris does great work with these. If you're watching on YouTube, you can scan the QR code. That will take you right to the website where you can sign up for free, and they get delivered right to your email inbox. Thanks to everybody for watching this video. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We are trying to get to 30K subscribers by the end of draft season. Let's take a break, and we'll be back right after this.
Always find a way back home.
Welcome back in. We are breaking down the shortstop position and jumping into ADP using Fantasy Pros average draft position. Reminder that we are using CBS eligibility for these position previews. Things look very different over on Yahoo and some other places, but again, just CBS eligibility. As I mentioned, 5 shortstops going in the top 14 picks. Bobby Witt Jr. with an ADP of 2.3, Elly De La Cruz at 4.8, Gunnar Henderson at 6.8, Mookie Betts at 9.5, and Francisco Lindor at 13.3. Let's talk about Bobby Witt Jr., who has developed into a superstar at just 24 years old, has finished as a top 6 player 2 years in a row, improved the plate discipline, hit the ball harder than ever before. Yes, he sacrificed some steals from 49 down to 31, but he improved in every other category. Massive counting stats this past season as well. You should probably expect the batting average to come down a bit just because, he hit 330, so that's not likely to happen again. The only question here, Chris, is how high to take Bobby Witt Jr.? What do you think?
Number one.
Number one.
He's my number one player. It's more about the lack of obvious downside for Witt. Like, his ceiling is not as high as what Aaron Judge and Shohei Ohtani have shown over the past couple of seasons. And if that's what you're looking for, I totally get it. I think it's a very reasonable pick. I think the top 3 are clearly in a class of their own. There's a big gap between them and the rest of the group. There are more ways for Aaron Judge and Shohei Ohtani to go wrong than Bobby Witt. Like, okay, maybe Bobby Witt doesn't hit 332 again. That's probably not going to happen. We had a 315 XBA last year, which is like almost unheard of. Expected stats don't really go that high. And he was 98th percentile in X slug. He actually underperformed his expected slugging percent or his expected ISO. And so he's my number one player. He was on a 40 steal pace before the All-Star break. Maybe he gets back to that.
Yeah.
I don't know, because he hit for more power in the second half. He just didn't have as many opportunities to run. Whatever the case may be, it's really hard to see what the bad season for Bobby Witt looks like, even acknowledging that every player has a range of outcomes. He's missed almost no time as a professional. There's Judge and Ohtani are the higher upside plays. I will take Witt and not mess up the first pick, I guess.
When Witt first broke into the league as a 20 homer, 30 steal rookie, he had terrible plate discipline. He hit 254. I thought, okay, this guy's going to be a batting average liability. And he's gotten better every year. He's turned that liability into now I think his clearest strength. Yeah, maybe he won't hit 332 again, but I'd bet on him batting over 300. And the drop from 49 steals in 2023 to 31 in 2024, I think that could easily reverse. Stolen base is one of those stats that can fluctuate pretty wildly, especially when you get into numbers that high. And I think I'm with Chris. I've had Shohei Ohtani ranked as my number one player until now, but I think I'm going to move Witt there. In Roto, I'll have Aaron Judge ahead of him in points.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say Witt is bad in points. As little as he strikes out, it's still a good format for him, but it's just an exceptional. Judge is an exceptional choice in that one. So yeah, I agree. Witt number one, because I've gotten burned the last couple years. 2 years ago, Aaron Judge coming off the 62 homer season. It's like, well, you have to take Judge with the number one pick. You just have to. Last year, Ronald Acuna coming off the 40-70 season. Oh, you have to take Acuna. You just have to. So I'm afraid of doing that again with Ohtani coming off the 50-50 season, particularly when he already has
it's the shoulder
health concerns.
Yeah. If he wasn't coming off shoulder surgery, Shohei Ohtani would be the number one pick, but I don't expect him to run as much. I have concerns about how he's going to hit with the shoulder. So that's enough. But it's a three-way coin flip, basically.
All right, let's move on to Elly De La Cruz, top 5 player right now in ADP, and this is where I get myself in trouble. Elly De La Cruz is probably the most fun player in the league. He is electric. He is maybe the fastest. He just led all of baseball with 67 steals, also hit 25 home runs with 105 runs scored, but he does still have his warts. He's a unique player for fantasy. I'm not going to go as far as I did this time last year and call him a bust and say he can wind up in the minors. Some dumb things that I said. But again, there are things you have to worry about here. In Roto, he mostly looks like a 2-category contributor. It's runs, it's steals. batting average, home run, and RBI are all just okay, not really helping in those, not really hurting you either, but just not really a contributor. And in head-to-head points, 3.5 fantasy points per game, still elite, but that makes him more of a late first-round pick than a top 5 player. With all that said, Scott, Elly just finished as the 7th overall player in fantasy. He might get even better. He's only 23 years old, so you kind of have to factor that into your analysis. Where are you at? Where are you willing to take Elly De La Cruz in the first round?
Lower than he's going. I think I have him 9th overall in Roto. I have him behind Gunnar Henderson, in addition to Bobby Witt at this position. Look, if you're just doing the upside game, I get it. Nobody is going to steal more bases than Elly De La Cruz this year, in all likelihood. He hits the ball extremely hard. So I hesitate to put a limit on what his home run ceiling is at this age, too. And it's possible he ends up being the best player in fantasy. Very possible. But I like to weigh downside risk, too, in a way that NFBC ADP doesn't so much account for, because it's basically an upside competition. Downside for Elly De La Cruz.
It's not just NFBC, by the way, Scott. He's 6 at Fantrax, 5 on Yahoo, 4 in RT Sports.
I think a lot of those are influenced by the NFBC ranking, though. He is probably going to be the worst bet for batting average among all first rounders, the worst bet for RBI among all first rounders, the worst bet for home runs among all first rounders. So he's putting you in a hole in 3 categories. The batting average one especially is hard to make up for. And steals are so plentiful and available from so many different types of players that I don't know that I need a huge mass of them in round 1. It feels like overkill, especially when you're sacrificing in other areas. So yeah, if all goes right, great. I'm not expecting all to go right because of how much he strikes out, because of how much he puts on the ball on the ground. I think we have to assume there's going to be some degree of that continuing into this year.
I want to put it in a slightly different way, because I think there's a chance that we get to the end of the season, and like you said, Elly De La Cruz is the number 7 player in fantasy. I think there's a chance we get to the end of the season, and like by whatever value system you want to use, he ends up being worth this. The issue for me more so is the path you have to take through your draft after you take Elly De La Cruz in the first round really narrows your options, where if you pass on Elly De La Cruz, or if you pass on Jose Ramirez or Gunnar Henderson or Kyle Tucker, whichever amazing player you want to talk about passing on to take Elly De La Cruz, that means that if you get to the 5th round and the clear best player is another stolen base standout, I mean, you don't have to pass. It can be tough, though.
Yeah.
You're
right.
Like, you might get to a point where CJ Abrams is just the clear best player left, that he should have been taken a round before. And it's like, well, can you really double up on those 2 guys? And if you do,
it limits your choices.
Are you going to get to a point later in the draft where, I don't know, Cody Bellinger is the clear best first baseman and you need a first baseman, but it's like, I'm kind of like the steals I'm going to get from Cody Bellinger are a big part of his value position. That's not so true if you've already got Elly De La Cruz. So it just, you reach a point of diminishing returns with stolen bases, and he narrows the path you can take. Like you gotta be conscious about batting average. You gotta find some RBI standouts. You gotta find home runs.
Right.
And that for me it's more about the avenues through my draft that Elly De La Cruz cuts off than anything necessarily wrong with him as a player. There are things wrong with him as a player, but I think he will be worth.
Right. Those things wrong with him is what's going to cause you to have to be really particular about the players you draft thereafter. And that's what I meant by saying the steals were kind of overkill. Because it's going to force you to make decisions later in the draft that you might rather not have to make. Now,
if you go through your first round and then you get to the second and Yordan Alvarez is still there at 20 or whatever, great, problem solved. You don't have to this fixed itself. It's just, what if it's Trea Turner?
Yeah.
That's where it gets tough.
Yeah. And, we talk about these pairings in the first couple of rounds if you play in a categories league. If there's any crazy way that Vlad Jr. falls down or Yordan Alvarez, who you just mentioned, I think it's not likely. Freddie Freeman is someone that's much more likely. Yeah, like that's a great pairing with Elly, but even then, you might be chasing power after.
Big home run deficit for your first picks. Yeah.
So even if you pair him with Vlad, that's 55 home runs maybe from your first two picks. It's not. Yeah. You're still probably behind pace a little bit.
Yeah. Elly clearly better in a roto or categories league. If you're wondering about head-to-head points, we do have him lower in that format. Scott and I each have him 15th overall. Chris has him just a tad lower, 17th overall. So an early second-round pick there in a points league. Let's move down to Gunnar Henderson, another youngster who made huge improvements. He finished top 6 overall in roto. He was the 6th best hitter in head-to-head points. He improved the plate discipline. He improved against lefties. He ran more last season. A true 5-category producer in fantasy. If I'm nitpicking, which I just did with Elly, so I'll do that with Gunnar, he overperformed his expected stats. He did take a step back in the second half. He didn't hit the ball as hard in that second half. Chris, do you worry at all about those things that happened, overperforming expected stats, second half, coming down a little bit, or do you feel comfortable taking Gunnar as like a top 6 or 8 player in fantasy?
I have him ranked 5th. I have him a couple spots ahead of Elly De La Cruz in the overall rankings. It's a small difference, but yeah, I mean, look, you look at the second half versus first half, and it's like, okay, maybe he's only a 30 homer guy instead of a 40 homer guy like he looked in the first half. Like there was a stretch through like most of June where he was like neck and neck with Aaron Judge in home runs. And obviously Judge picked up the pace, Gunnar slowed down, and he's not quite as good at batting average as some of the other guys in the first round. He's not quite as good at power as some of the other guys in the first round. He's not quite as good as a stolen base threat as some of the other guys in the first round. He's just an A- everywhere, a B+ at worst. And so it's just such a well-rounded skill set. He's still so young. He doesn't turn 24 until the end of June. So like I can see him cutting the strikeout rate and challenging for a 300 average. I can see him pushing for 30 steals. It's not necessarily the most likely outcome. And I do want to be clear that we just talked a lot of crap about Elly De La Cruz, who is the same age and could make the same improvements that we're talking about with Gunnar Henderson. But Gunnar Henderson's skill set is already well-rounded. And so I just think that base of skills is really nice to build around.
Yep. And would you rather have Gunnar or Elly De La Cruz, Scott?
Gunnar. As I already said, look who isn't listening to whom now.
Oh. Yeah, I guess.
Awkward.
Yeah. Better in roto or categories or head-to-head points, Gunnar Henderson?
Better in roto.
Agree.
All right. Let's move on to Mookie Betts, who also has shortstop eligibility. A down season, which was hurt by a fractured left hand, but there were some weird things going on despite the injury. He had that awesome April, but then was just kind of mid in May and June before getting hurt. The power metrics came way down from that just monster year in 2023. The quality of contact and pull rate definitely affected those power metrics for Mookie Betts, but he's Mookie Betts and he plays for the Dodgers. So, Scott, I have these kind of conflicting thoughts in my head. I'm like, do I want to worry about any of these things, or is it just Mookie Betts who plays for the Dodgers?
Yeah, I lean toward the latter. I feel like he's the sort of player where, you could dig into the data and say, oh, this was a little bit worse, so maybe that explains why this is happening. But we've done that so many times for Mookie Betts in the past. Like he's had years where his power was a little bit down. He's had years where his batting average was a little bit down. He's had years where he stopped running so much, and actually that continued. But the point is, he comes back the next year, and it's like whatever worries you had about him seemed frivolous. He's Mookie Betts. He's a Hall of Fame caliber player. He wasn't that far off his usual production last year, and he's in the best lineup in baseball. I think he's a stud, and I think you shouldn't overthink it. And I'll add, he's the only multi-eligible first rounder, and he might pick up more than just the shortstop and outfield eligibility he already has. He might pick up second base, which would be incredible.
I think he is obviously everyone is unlikely to finish number 1 overall. He is among the first rounders, I think, relatively unlikely to finish first overall. I think he's also relatively likely to finish in the first round. You know?
So higher floor, but maybe not the highest ceiling.
Yeah. There are higher ceiling players out there in the first round at this position, perhaps, but nobody's floor is higher than Mookie's.
Which is crazy when you think about what he just did 2 years ago, right, Chris? Where, I mean, who's to say he doesn't get back to that? Where
he could,
over 300 with, almost 40 home runs. And
it's just the fact that he gave a lot of the power gains back last year, not just in terms of the actual number of home runs, but the underlying stats. And last year it was like, you said the awesome April, but he really didn't hit for power in April. It was, remember, he had like 5 homers in the first 7 games of the season or something, including 4 in the month of March. I don't think he had another month he had 5 in September. That was the one month where he hit for more. Other than that, it was 4 or fewer in every other month. He only had 5 games in March. So I think it might be more like 20 to 25 homers this season, but it's nitpicking.
Yeah. I will ask you guys just where Mookie Betts fits into the first round for you personally. So, Chris, we'll start with you from a roto perspective, and then Scott, I'll ask you about points league. But Chris, Mookie Betts versus, let's say, Gunnar Henderson. Who would you rather have?
Gunnar.
What about Mookie Betts versus Elly?
Elly.
What about Mookie Betts versus Juan Soto?
Mookie.
Mookie Betts versus Kyle Tucker?
Kyle Tucker.
Mookie Betts versus Corbin Carroll?
Mookie. It's Mookie versus everyone else. Well, not Jose Ramirez, I guess. That's the one.
So you would take him over Tatis and Lindor and all those other guys. All right.
Julio Rodriguez, whatever group of players,
Scott, before you ask me about points leagues, let me just clarify, because a minute ago I said I had Elly De La Cruz 9th for Roto. It's actually Betts I have 9th. I have De La Cruz 8th.
Okay.
But now for points leagues.
From a points league perspective, I mean, you could probably make the argument he's a top 5 guy, right? Like, would you rather have Betts or Jose Ramirez in a points league?
Yet to the broader question, yes, Betts is more valuable in points leagues. His plate discipline, particularly his lack of strikeouts, adds a lot there. You asked me Betts versus who in points leagues?
Jose Ramirez.
Ramirez.
I think it's probably just Ohtani, Witt, Judge, Jose Ramirez, and Juan Soto, right? Those are the only ones ahead of Betts in a points league.
You said Ramirez?
Yeah.
I mean, I have Tucker ahead of him.
Yeah, Tucker's the tough one because his plate discipline was so much better last year than it ever had been.
Yeah.
And if that sticks, that's huge.
I have Tucker and Gunnar Henderson ahead of him, partly because I halfway anticipate another small step forward for Henderson.
Yeah.
And so I have Tucker 6th, Henderson 7th, Betts 8th. This is for points leagues again. $1 separating those 3. So they're virtually equal.
All right, let's drop down to Francisco Lindor, who has finished as a top 12 player 2 years in a row, narrowly missed going 30-30 by 1 stolen base. Would have got to 30-30 2 years in a row. He got off to a really slow start. He was moved to the leadoff spot on May 18th, and from that point forward, Lindor hit .304 with 26 homers, 23 steals, and a 928 OPS, seems like he might be getting better. He posted the best barrel rate and expected stats of his career, and Lindor did all of that without Juan Soto batting behind him. So, man, it just feels like, Chris, we can get 30-30 with, I mean, if you're dreaming big, 110, 120 runs scored. It's when you have Soto and Alonso and Vientos batting behind you, the upside's going to be pretty high here for Lindor.
I'm putting this out there. I want the streets to know. I don't want to hear a darn thing about Francisco Lindor ever again.
Buy low on May 1st.
Every year, there is some point in the season where, Francisco Lindor sucks. What's wrong with Francisco Lindor? Nothing. Just stop. He's going to get his 30-30 at the end of the season. He's going to be one of the 15 best players in fantasy. Don't come to me with your Francisco Lindor complaints ever again, because I don't want to hear it. If he could hit 280, which he hasn't done since 2019, if you could count on him to hit 280 plus, Francisco Lindor is an easy first rounder. Instead,
he's probably about Gunnar Henderson.
Yeah. Instead, he's like the best second round pick you can make. He's
well,
awesome.
You and I actually both have him as a first rounder, Chris. We both have Lindor 12th for Roto.
Mm-hmm. He just doesn't typically go there.
He doesn't typically go there. You think he's 14th on average?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's great. Like, is that a New York thing? Did that only start because he signed a big contract with the Mets where people are wringing their hands over him constantly?
Yeah, I mean, there was like the one not great season, although really that was like two bad months instead of one bad month. But yeah, people get antsy.
He's great.
It's dumb.
Yeah, he absolutely is. And really good in both format. Is there one that he's better at? Is he better in Roto versus a points league, Lindor?
I don't feel like there's a big difference. Strikeout rate's always low, which helps in points. He contributes. He's a standout in 4 Roto categories, and it's not like he's bad in batting average. He's just kind of a B minus in batting average.
Yeah.
He hits a lot of doubles.
Do you avoid, if you take Corbin Carroll at the back end of the first round, would you avoid pairing him and Lindor together because it's not the best batting average?
It's a little bit of a low batting average base, but
I don't know how I feel about Carroll's batting average potential. We saw kind of 2 different versions his rookie and sophomore season. Mm-hmm. He could be a plus in batting average. I'm just kind of calling him a question mark in batting average.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's, after Lindor, you drop down to the 2-3 turn where you find Trea Turner with an ADP of 24.3. Trea Turner bounced back in his second season with the Phillies. Despite missing over a month with a hamstring injury, the batting average jumped back up to 295. He got the strikeout rate down. He improved his in-zone contact. And in 121 games, 21 homers, 19 steals. That's a full season pace of 28 homers and 25 steals. Did have a pretty rough second half where he chased more pitches out of the zone. Quality of contact came way down for Trea Turner. It's kind of been 2, I guess you could say, uneven seasons in Philadelphia. Are you buying the slight dip on Trea Turner at that 2-3 turn, whereas last year the ADP was 13.6?
You mean, do I like him at his current cost?
Are you buying the dip this year compared to last year? You're getting about a round of value.
I guess I'm not sure. Like, I want to make sure I'm understanding the syntax of buying the dip. Is it?
Are you buying him at his current price?
Yes, easily. I think he is. I think the disrespect being shown to Trea Turner is outrageous, and I'm going to say that for a lot of shortstops. Trea Turner has been a first-round mainstay pretty much ever since he broke into the league. And I think he's still basically the same guy. He's just as fast. He has just as much power. The batting average dip that first year in Philadelphia when he had some chasing issues and seemed like he was pressing, but then it bounced right back last year. I'm still penciling him in for 20 homers, 30 steals, good batting average, ton of runs scored. I think he'll deliver second round numbers. I'm not going to say first round numbers, though that's possible. I'm expecting second round numbers from Trea Turner, and as I said at the top of the show, I've seen him slip to as late as round 4 before, which is just stupid value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a fair projection is 280-ish, 25. I brought the stat up before. I still think he's capable of running more. I don't know that it's going to happen. It's probably not going to happen, especially after a hamstring injury. But 10 steals in his first 33 games before hurting his hamstring, that is a 49 steal pace over a full season. So probably not going to happen, but I still think he's capable if he wanted to do that.
It's probably not going to happen because he's probably not going to stay healthy enough for it to happen. But this is one of those things where I talk about, like, with,
well, because he didn't stay healthy last year, but the previous year, 155 games. The year before that, 160. Last year was the exception in terms of him getting hurt.
Right, but we only have the 1 year where he stayed healthy under the new rule set, and it wasn't a great number of steals. It was only 30. He didn't get caught stealing once. Yeah. And then he comes out running like he did early last year, and I think that signaled that he was more comfortable, that he was getting on base a lot more than, because his 320 OBP in 2023 just meant that there weren't as many opportunities 4 stolen bases. And so I don't think it's likely he steals 40 bases. I think if he does stay healthy, he absolutely can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Trea Turner is not someone who you would think is a standout in a points league. He's still really good in that format. So 3.3 fantasy points per game. But I guess
he was always undervalued in points leagues. It's just now he seems like he's being undervalued in Roto too. And I think part of it is just people like, oh, he had 19 steals last year. He had a 266 batting average the year before. This must be a guy on the decline. But there are reasonable explanations for the 266 batting average, him pressing in the first half, the 19 steals last year, him dealing with the hamstring injury that I think are disguising that he's still pretty much the same player.
Yeah. And when we talk about those first round pairings, those first 2 round pairings, if you can put Trea Turner with Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, that just feels like it works out really well, given those guys' skill sets. So that's something I would be looking to do in a Roto or a categories league. Let's take a quick break, our final break. And when we return, we'll get back into shortstop ADP right after this.
Gives it to Jenkins for the championship. A 16 beats a 1. From sweet to elite to the Final Four.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball today, our shortstop preview, taking a look at some Fantasy Pros ADP. And after Trea Turner, we drop down into the 4th round, where we find Corey Seager with an ADP of 41.8. Got off to a slow start last year following sports hernia surgery in January. But from May on, he hit 290 with 28 home runs and a 931 OPS. His season eventually ended early in September with yet another hernia surgery, 2 hernia surgeries in 1 year, this time on the other side. He still crushed the ball. Corey Seager did. Expected stats were very strong. Chris, you just have to wonder about a soon-to-be 31-year-old who's had 2 hernia surgeries last year and has played under 125 games 2 seasons in a row.
And has always had trouble staying healthy, right? He's only played 150 games once or twice in his career, once since 2016. I think that's all fair, and it's a reason to drop him down your rankings. On the other hand, is Corey Seager just a 40 homer guy now? Because he hit 33 in 119 games in 2023. Then he hit 30 in 123 games. We don't even have to do the like from May 1st on thing here. He was on a 40 homer pace last year. And so, okay, yeah, I get the injury risk. I get that he doesn't steal bases, but he's a 40 homer guy who might project to hit 290 as well. I don't think that is there another one of those in baseball?
Yordan Alvarez, I guess.
Yeah, Yordan, maybe Shohei.
Well,
there are some first rounders who you could definitely see getting.
No, you
there,
can see, but you could reasonably project. He's on a very short list of guys that you could do that with. So
it comes down to games played, Chris.
Yeah, if he stays healthy,
plus, yeah,
which he's only done once in the last 4 years.
He's almost certainly not going to, but I still think the price is right here for Corey Seager. I will still. What are we saying? 44 overall around then? 41.8?
41.8, yep.
Yeah, Corey Seager is, I believe, a value even at that price for me. He's 34 for me, so I'm happy to take that plunge.
I'm a big backer of Seager from way back, but I just haven't been that motivated to draft him this year, and I don't think it has so much to do with him as just the way this position breaks down. Like the biggest issue for Seager, even beyond the health, the biggest issue for Seager in a Roto league is that he is one of only 2 zeros at this for stolen bases at this position. He is a zero at a position where you expect to get steals. And so it creates, if we're saying Elly De La Cruz creates a complication with the batting average in round 1, Seager creates a complication with the lack of steals at shortstop. I've always overlooked that in the past, but I'm less inclined to this year because I know what's still to come at shortstop. And I like the value of so many players here. I'll block the position with the Gunnar Henderson or a Francisco Lindor. I'm not sure I want to block the position with the Corey Seager.
I'm happy to block it. I've got a middle infield spot. I've got a utility spot. I'm fine blocking it with Corey Seager.
I will say it changes for me in points leagues. Points, Seager is a true stud in that format.
He's like close to 4 points per game, right?
He has been in the past. Last year it was only 3.20, which is a little underwhelming, but he's capable of more, certainly. And in points leagues, you don't have to worry about the lack of steals, obviously.
Chris, does your mindset change on Corey Seager if you play in a slightly deeper league just because the replacement value is not as good?
Only if I don't have IL spots. Otherwise, I'll figure it out.
Okay.
He's just such a true difference maker when he's healthy.
Yep. And Seager, looking up how Seager's doing on his rehab coming back from that surgery, says he feels great and will be ready to go on the first day of spring training. Quote, "It's a pretty normal offseason, which is nice, first time in a while," which, all right, he's having a normal offseason despite having hernia surgery, which is
well, because he had the surgery last year in like January, right? Like late January.
I mean, that completely threw his offseason.
Yeah, that's going to throw up. But you do the timetable. He was back by opening day, so he missed like 2.5 months. He should be more than healthy.
Yeah,
he should be more than recovered if it's the same timetable. So I have concerns overall, just not about that, like about his recovery from the surgery.
Last thing, I said 3.2 points per game for Seager this past year. The previous year, which was his career year, right? 2023, 4.14 head-to-head points per game, which was basically what Juan Soto did last year.
Mm-hmm. Let's drop down a little bit, and we get two interesting names. Oneil Cruz, an ADP of 49.3, CJ Abrams at 54. So this is round 5 of a 12-team league. Oneil Cruz had a very solid season, but we're still waiting for that huge breakout. We haven't got it yet. One of 19 players to go 2020, still posts ridiculous StatCast data, 99th percentile average exit velocity, 97th percentile barrel rate for Oneil Cruz. He does still have his struggles with strikeouts and against left-handed pitching. Scott, how do you feel about using an early 5th-round pick on Oneil Cruz?
I don't like it. It's sort of like Elly De La Cruz, where I could totally see it working out. It's been a disappointment the last 2 years. He has not lived up to that draft standing, and we just keep taking him there. It's like, if I'm not taking Corey Seager at this point, I'm definitely not taking Oneil Cruz, who I think obviously hasn't lived up to his potential yet. Has the huge exit velocities. If he could put the ball on the ground less, maybe strike out less, then yeah, he could be launched into the stratosphere for fantasy. But it's that if looks less and less certain with each passing year. He's 26 now, so it needs to happen soon if it's going to happen. And I'm not willing to invest in him with the presumption it's going to happen this time.
Here's the thing I'm struggling with is, like, isn't the hope? I guess isn't Oneil Cruz being drafted to do more or less what CJ Abrams did last year? Like, I understand that we have our concerns about CJ Abrams, but like, Oneil Cruz hits the ball way harder than CJ Abrams. Mm-hmm. He's not necessarily a better power hitter at this point.
He isn't yet. He has more upside, clearly, and that's always been the thinking with Cruz is, okay, we know how high the upside is. Mm-hmm. Can he meet it this year? He has not met it yet. CJ Abrams has come closer to meeting his upside, and I agree, it's been better. I rank CJ Abrams ahead of Oneil Cruz, even though that's not what ADP shows, which I think is what you were getting at. I said at the top of the show, I'm expecting very similar numbers from them, but maybe 15 to 20 extra steals from Abrams.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say for Cruz, he ran a lot more in the second half. It was closer to like a 40 steal pace in the second half of the season. And the problem there is mostly just August. He had 10 steals in August, 3 in September. So even that didn't sustain. So I'm not even sure necessarily how much I actually buy that.
Plus, when you do the down steals by months or halves and say, oh, if he can sustain this pace for a full season. I found that almost never happens.
Steals come in bunches.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the actual number that Cruz had last year, stolen bases, was 22.
Yeah. And 15 of those came in the second half. So,
yeah.
And I think you mentioned this, Chris, but a 36 steal pace over 150 games there for Oneil Cruz. So I think he still has 30-30 potential if everything clicks, if everything goes right. But
absolutely,
we just haven't seen, that really come to fruition yet. Let's talk about CJ Abrams, who is certainly an interesting player. Pretty similar seasons 2 years in a row, right around a 245 batting average, 18 to 20 homers, right around 80 runs, 65 RBI. The biggest difference, his steals went from 47 in 2023 down to 31 last season. It's a very aggressive approach at the plate. He has these wild swings in production. And now we might have to worry a little bit about his maturity. What happened late in the season, he stayed out all night at a casino. He was demoted to the minors, and that's where he ended his season. He's still just 24 years old. Chris, I still feel like there's another level, like there's some untapped potential here with CJ Abrams. I'm not necessarily expecting it, but I think that's within his range of outcomes. What do you think? Are you willing to bet on Abrams in the 5th round?
I think I have him a little lower than his ADP. His ADP is 54. I have him 55, so that's okay. Yeah, I think there are concerns. I don't know how much I worry about the late season benching.
Demotion to the minors.
Yeah, he's gonna be on the opening day roster. Like maybe they just have a short leash with him, but I'm hoping it serves as a wake-up call. I think the team obviously is hoping it serves as a wake-up call. The one thing that is interesting about CJ Abrams is he's a really bad defender at shortstop. To the point where he might be better off moving to second base at some point. And I don't know what that looks like for Washington overall, or if they even have the ability to do that, or if it just means
or center field. That seemed like that was the eventual plan in San Diego when he was still there.
Though, now with James Wood and Dylan Cruz, who knows whether that's viable, but it does feel like something's got to give in Washington at some point with CJ Abrams at shortstop. And is that a trade? Is that a shift in position? I don't know what that looks like, but there's just a tiny bit of uncertainty here, but he did a really good job tapping into his pull side power last season. He's, I think, a very good bet to improve on his stolen base total from last year. He only stole 31 in 138 games. That was way down from the year before. The biggest difference, though, he only got caught four times in 2023. That was never going to be sustainable. He got caught 12 times on 43 attempts this year. That's also unsustainable. So I expect some regression to at least 35, probably closer to 40.
Yeah,
is my expectation.
I'm expecting a 20-40 season from Abrams, and the batting average probably be around 250, but you can live with that for 2040. I will say I'm encouraged that there hasn't been more to come out this offseason.
There's been nothing.
Yeah, that benching, him being out at the casino until 8 a.m. And being sent to the minors, that was kind of earth-shaking. You don't see that a lot from a player as highly regarded as Abrams. And because he had hit 199 with a 610 OPS over the previous 3 months, it got my imagination going. Okay, is this just a one-night thing that happened? Is this frequently happening? Are there real maturity issues here? But we haven't heard anything else about it. And so I find that encouraging that we don't know, obviously, but it my hunch is now currently it was just a one-off, and it's going to be water under the bridge by the time the season starts.
And that's the public comments from the team as well. There's a quote from Dave Martinez in December. He's doing well. I love CJ. We have an unbelievable relationship. He's going to be our everyday shortstop. He struggled. He had a great first half, struggled a little bit in the second half, but he's going to be just fine. He's working. He's ready. He's getting ready to go. There doesn't seem to be any, at least public, lingering issue there.
And both Cruz and Abrams are better in a roto categories league than they are in a points league, right?
Oneil Cruz, yes.
By a lot. I tier Abrams differently in Roto than I do in points.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Going about a round past Abrams is Willy Adames with an ADP of 65.8, the 6th round of a 12-team league, coming off a monster season, 32 homers, 112 RBI, 21 steals, career highs across the board. He hit 13 3-run home runs that tied Ken Griffey Jr. for the most in a single season. All of that earned Adames a 7-year contract in San Francisco, which isn't the best landing spot for fantasy. If you look at park factors, American Family Field, 6th best home run park factor. Oracle Park is 28th. The Brewers were 6th in runs. They were 2nd in steals. The Giants were 17th in runs, 29th in steals last season. Scott, I just don't like buying off the peak year. Plus, it's first season in a new location, big contract, 6th round. It's going to be a stay away for me.
Yeah, I agree. Now, it's priced in to some degree because we're talking about him. He's going 9th on average at this position, right? And I mentioned at the top of the show, he was a top 15 player, not top 15 shortstop last year. So it seems like there's a fair amount of skepticism. But even when you look at the overall rank for Adames, it's much higher than we've seen him drafted in the past. I think last year for him was just one of those magical 90th percentile outcome seasons where he basically sets career highs and everything, even though you look at the underlying stats and it doesn't look like there was any real skill change there for Willy Adames. His StatCast page across the board, virtually identical to the previous 4 seasons. And so I even if he had stayed in Milwaukee, I'd expect a step back from Adames. The fact he's going to a worse park too. I am not particularly motivated to draft him. I'll admit that sometimes I have just because everybody else keeps passing him over, but it's not something I'm eager to do. On the subject of stolen bases specifically, he had 21 last year, had never had even double digits before. I doubt he'll get 21 again. But as I said for Matt Chapman on the third base episode, since we're in a new era for stolen bases where thresholds are raised, when I see a big jump for a player like that, I imagine it's a decision having to do with the new rules and that he is just going to make this a bigger part of his game going forward. So I'm hopeful Adames will give us about 15 maybe, but I still don't think it's going to be enough when you factor in the batting average and home runs and RBI and runs all dropping.
Just to put in perspective, the rise in ADP year over year, Willy Adames last year, 179th in ADP, now all the way up to 66th. Is he better in a Roto categories league or in a head-to-head points league?
Roto.
Okay. After Adames, we dropped down about 40 picks. So again, this is one of those kind of tier drops in ADP. Down to Matt McLain with an ADP of 106. That is the 9th round of a 12-team league. Matt McLain missed all of last season with various injuries, shoulder surgery in March, then suffered a stress reaction in his rib while ramping things back up. He played 13 games in the Arizona Fall League. He got some run in the outfield as well while he was out there. If we go back to 2023, it was a breakout season for McLain that saw him hit 28 home runs, 24 steals between the minors and the majors. He has the pedigree, was a first-round pick back in 2021, but there were some concerns. If he played the discipline, 28.5% strikeout rate that got worse in the second half of 2023. Chris, what do you think about this ADP? Because we are getting a discount. You remember before the shoulder injury last year, he was a top 60 pick, Matt McLain. Now he's going just outside the top 100.
I didn't think he should have been a top 60 pick last year. I think I ranked him more closer to his current ADP, maybe a little lower. Probably a little. I would guess around 100 is where I ranked him last year, and I rank him a little lower now because he's coming back from a completely lost season with injuries, and I don't think you can just discount that.
And significant injuries, a shoulder surgery is pretty big.
And so, as awesome as he was in 2023 at both AAA and the major league level, it was a complete outlier for his career. He had an 816 OPS and hit 232 with a massive strikeout rate at AA. It was 127 strikeouts in 103 games. The underlying plate discipline metrics as a rookie were pretty bad. Not quite Zach Geloff bad, but in the Geloffian neighborhood, let's say. And the quality of contact is pretty average. You can expect above average power because he plays half his games in Cincinnati, but it feels like people just look at the 290 average and the 25 pace from his rookie season and are just like, yes, let's go, Matt McLain. That's what you can do. And it's just not at all a sure thing. It might be, the XBA was 256. The expected ISO was 180. He beat both of those by a significant amount. I think it's probably closer to 2020. And maybe the steals are higher. The Reds love to run. Maybe that goes up. But I'm not so sure the overall profile is that much better than like Xander Bogaerts.
I was just thinking, if he hits 260 in 2020, that's probably close to what we're expecting from Bogaerts, right?
Maybe he pushes the steals closer to 25 or 30.
Right. I think
that's reasonable.
Going to be the biggest difference.
But Xander Bogaerts is probably going to hit 280, 290. And Matt McLain might hit 260. So that's
the difference in ballpark.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But like, that's already baked in. Like Xander
right.
plays.
It might be like a 5 home run difference between the two of them.
Sure.
McLain having more, and then like a 10 to 15 steal difference.
It might
between
be
the two of them, and that's kind of what I'm expecting. Batting average is where McLain's going to have the hardest time measuring up to that rookie season because that strikeout rate is much higher than I think people realize. It was like 29% as a rookie, and it got worse over the course of his rookie year. I think the thing we haven't mentioned yet, which is maybe the most important thing about McLain, is he's very likely to pick up second base eligibility. Yes. And if he's a second baseman, even with the concerns, he's clearly top 10. He would slot right in between Jordan Westburg, who we all love, and Luis Garcia for me.
He would be my number 6 guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which will be pushed down once Jazz Chisholm and presumably Mookie Betts gain second base eligibility. That's why I said top 10. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it would currently be 6th.
And McLain better in a categories league or head-to-head points?
Much better in a categories league.
Yeah, I think
I was saying that a lot for shortstops. That's part of the reason why I'm more willing to pay the premium for Seager in a points league.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys, the time has come. After McLain, we drop down about 2 rounds and we get Bo Bichette with an ADP of 130. That is round 11 of a 12-team league. Bo Bichette is coming off a disastrous year. He was limited to just 81 games due to a recurring calf strain and then a broken finger. Even when he played, he was flat out bad. His ADP has dropped nearly 100 spots year over year. We're still talking about a 27-year-old who is entering a contract year. I know both of you guys are in, so I will just give you the floor. Scott, you can go first. Bo Bichette.
This is insane to me. This is one of the most insane drafting trends I've ever seen for a player. Bo Bichette, from the time he entered the league, was an early round mainstay. And last year was his only real misstep. And normally we give players a pass for that, and people just aren't. And I don't understand, because he was playing injured the whole time, had this calf injury. It's totally understandable why Bichette struggled to the degree he did. But look at the track record. He hit no less than 290 in any of his first 5 seasons. Even with last year's terrible batting average, he's still a career 290 hitter. Like, he was as bankable for batting average as any hitter in the entire player pool. And people are deciding, oh, he hit 225 this one time. That must just be who Bo Bichette is now. I don't get it. He's also 27, by the way. Like, so in the prime of his career, I don't understand why people are writing off Bo Bichette. And I say that as somebody who, when we were drafting him in round 3 last year, I thought he was kind of overrated. I didn't, he's not a big base stealer anymore. He's probably more like a 20 homer guy than a 30 homer guy. But now he's going halfway through the draft almost. And I'm expecting him to bounce back to a 290-ish, if not 300 batting average, probably with those 20 homers. Maybe he'll chip in some steals.
I think that's what's driving the price down as much as anything is 5 steals each in the past 2 seasons. And now last year was a half season. He was on a 10 steal pace. This is what I would say, because we had the Matt Chapman argument yesterday about the stolen bases. We talked about Willy Adames. One key thing to keep in mind in both of those cases, it was a contract year for both of them. And the data on contract years is mixed, but one thing that I know you see in contract years is players tend to stay on the field more when they're in a contract year. They just play through stuff. I would guess you also see more stolen bases in a contract year, because
Adames did it. Aaron Judge did it.
That's something that you can control. That is the one statistic. Like, obviously you control your hitting, but you can't like decide I'm going to hit a home run right here. What you can do is, I'm on first base. This pitcher's not paying attention. I'm going to run. And you might be more likely to do that in a contract year when you're trying to boost your stats. And so
Rob Tidwell would never.
I think, is it pie in the sky to say 20 steals? That's unlikely, but Willy Adames just stole 21 when he had, it was 21 last year.
Yeah.
When he had like 14 in his career before that, or something, some crazy. Matt Chapman had doubled his career total more. Like, it's possible that a guy with middling athleticism just decides to run a whole bunch more in a contract year. I'm not saying you should bank on it. I'm not saying you should look at your team and say, I got 15, 20 steals from Bichette. But it's within the realm of possibility. He's going to score a bunch of runs. He's going to be a good source of batting average. I agree with everything. It is.
But he doesn't need the steals to reward his current ADP by a lot. He is still a huge value, even if he doesn't steal a single base in 2025.
And here's his ADPs every year before this, since he became a regular. 60th in 2020. It was 12, 5, 14, 37. And then what is it today?
130.
130. It's just, it's bonkers. It's
as a 27-year-old.
Yeah, like that's the thing. It'd be one thing if he was 30 and last year happened. Okay, I could see getting out, but this is like, he's going behind Ezekiel Tovar. We're being mean to Ezekiel Tovar. He's fine. He has course field. It's whatever. He's going 3 spots ahead of Anthony Volpe. Like, Anthony Volpe, who can't do anything except steal bases. Come on, guys.
Anthony Volpe is a certain liability in batting average, and you're worried Bichette might be, and so you're going to take Volpe instead. That's stupid.
Yeah. It just it's an overreaction to one bad year, and we should be better than this.
And I don't think the Blue Jays lineup is great by any means, but
it's not bad.
Their top 4 can be serviceable: Springer, Vlad, Santander, and Bo Bichette. So maybe the counting stats are okay for him. I will just paint the downside picture. He has had a lot of problems with that right leg, recurring right calf strain. He's had lots of issues with his right knee. He also went on the IL once with a right quad strain. So he's had lots of issues with that right leg. And maybe there's just something really wrong with that leg. And if that's the case, then yes, there could be huge downside here for Bo Bichette. I'm in the camp with you guys. I think it's more likely he bounces back in a contract year. And perhaps the biggest news of all, we're burying the lead. He cut his hair. Remember what Vlad Jr. did when he cut his hair last year?
I know, but Bo Bichette's hair was beautiful.
It was beautiful.
I used to love cutting photos for him. Anytime I could put a Bo Bichette photo in my article, I would do it just for that glorious mane.
More like
now I can't.
More like Flo Bichette, am I right?
Yeah, not anymore, unfortunately. All right, well, better in a Roto categories league or head-to-head points for Bichette?
Another one who's better in Roto.
I think in an ideal world, it's not a big difference, though.
Yeah, he doesn't walk much, but he also doesn't strike out much. So.
Yeah, he'll hit a bunch of doubles.
Yeah. All right. Sleepers, breakouts, and busts at shortstop. Let's keep things moving here. A sleeper, and we will go over to Chris.
Am I stealing Scott's by saying Carlos Correa?
I don't know.
I do have Carlos Correa as a sleeper, but you can go ahead.
This is one that, like, I understand he's probably not going to stay healthy, but 2023 is the aberration for Carlos Correa. He was bad that year, didn't seem to be healthy, seemed to be playing through it, but Last year, he had a 905 OPS, a 310 batting average. It was like a 28 homer, maybe a 26 homer, like 95 run, 95 RBI pace. I don't really care that he's not going to stay healthy if his price continues to be as unreasonably cheap as it is. His ADP in NFBC leagues is 247.5. That is, you're waiting the whole draft to fill your middle infield spot, and you got him just after Trevor Story came off the board. Come on, guys. Dansby Swanson, Willie Castro, Tyler Fitzgerald, Trevor Story. Even, I know Zach Neto was really good last year, but he might not be ready for opening day. We're going to take him ahead of Carlos Correa. Like, we're gonna downgrade Carlos Correa for injury concerns and then draft Zach Neto 70 picks ahead of Carlos Correa. That's silly. Carlos Correa is going to be a must-start player when he's healthy. Mm-hmm. Fill in the gaps when he misses time.
Yeah. So I will say add a couple things here. One is that I think the injury concerns are overblown. Last year it was plantar fasciitis, and that never really goes away. And so it's possible it could plague him this year too. Or it's possible it won't come up at all. And for what it's worth, the previous 3 years, games played for Carlos Correa, 135, 136, 148. Now, that's not the 150 number we're usually aiming for, but it's not that far off. It's not like you regret drafting a guy when he only plays 135 games, particularly when you're getting him outside pick 230, right? I could understand Carlos Correa going that late at this time last year because he was coming off a year where he hit 230 with a 711 OPS. And suddenly, in addition to the durability concern, there was a performance concern. But he answered that performance concern last year on a head-to-head points per game. Carlos Correa was basically Trea Turner, and he made the all-star team, and then the foot started bothering him. Okay, but he was huge for you for the first half, and I think the disrespect being shown to Carlos Correa right now, the disrespect, Frank, is enough to enrage me.
I do think it's a perfect call in a points league. Those are shallower. The replacement value is there, where if Correa gets hurt, obviously you could just pick somebody up off the waiver wire, someone who's likely at least pretty good. The further you go into, roto leagues, shortstop, middle infield spots, 15-teamers, it gets a little bit tougher. You have to make sure you have an IL spot and just be cognizant of, we've talked up sleepers at other positions. Brandon Lau comes to mind, where you don't want all of these guys that have potential injury risk on the same team. But if you have multiple teams, maybe it's Brandon Lau on one or Carlos Correa on the other. So just keep those things in mind. Scott, back to you for if you have another sleeper outside of Correa.
I mean, my favorite sleeper is Bo Bichette.
There you go.
The disrespect being shown to Bo Bichette. I will add one note. We pretty much covered it, but one thing I wanted to add, because you were raising the concern about his leg, and maybe that is helping to drive the cost down for Bichette. He's in a contract year. The Blue Jays came out early in the offseason and said, we're not trading him. Like, they know more about his leg than any of us do. They know this is the last year they control him, and they said, we're not trading him. So I think if you have concerns about the leg, that should at least relieve those concerns.
Mm-hmm. I was reading up a little bit before this podcast that maybe the Blue Jays have been listening a little bit more on Bo Bichette than they let on earlier. But your point, I think, is valid. And obviously, they know a lot about him. So we'll see if Bo Bichette remains on the Blue Jays all year, if he's there before the season. Right now, he's a Toronto Blue Jay. That's Bo Bichette. Sleeper for me is going to be Dansby Swanson, who had a bit of a down season. He actually ran more than usual. 19 steals were a career high. Turns out he needed core surgery after the season, and something that he was playing through for quite some time. He had the surgery in early October, expected to be a full go for spring training. I'm expecting the power to bounce back a little bit. 20-ish home runs is where Dansby Swanson usually is at. If he keeps up this running pace, is it crazy to say he can go 20-20 in an improved Cubs lineup, hitting somewhere in the middle there with Kyle Tucker and Seiya Suzuki and Ian Happ and Pete Crow Armstrong and all these guys? So I like the team context for the Cubs. I think there's a bit of a bounce back here for Swanson if he's healthy, and you're getting a 75 pick discount compared to where his ADP was last year. So I don't think there's huge upside, but a deep league play, solid guy.
It's another example because I think he's fine. I think he showed the last 2 months he's fine. I think he was playing hurt. Swanson is another example of why, like, I never feel like I've missed out at shortstop. Even if I don't get Bichette, because I'm drafting with Chris, he takes Bichette and I don't get him. Okay, I'll take Dansby Swanson. You know, it'll be okay. It won't be as good as Bichette, but it'll be fine.
All right, Chris, back to you for a breakout at shortstop.
Masyn Winn. I think the steals are going to go way up this year. I think he's going to hit leadoff. I think he's going to, once he got moved into the leadoff spot, it was like a 95 run, maybe 100 run, or very close to 100 run pace. The batting average was a little disappointing once he got up there, but I think he is someone who, because of his athleticism, because of a line drive swing, I think he should be able to hit 270-ish with 15 to 20 home runs. And I don't think the 270 batting average is a ceiling. I do think Masyn Winn, because of the amount of contact he makes, because of the amount of line drives he makes, because he tends to hit it to all fields. I've made the comp before, but I think you could see some like peak Tim Anderson type seasons. Maybe not.
I like it. I like that.
The 320 averages that Tim Anderson was running, but 285, 290. He doesn't strike out very much at all. He makes a lot of contact. He's really athletic. He's talked about wanting to steal 30 to 40 bases. I think him hitting leadoff, you could get not that different from like Nico Horner at a pretty sizable discount, even with, Nico Horner potentially not being ready by opening day.
Yeah, we're in agreement on this one, Chris. I wrote up Masyn Winn in Breakouts 1.0. You talked about him hopefully running more, 87th percentile sprint speed, and he's someone who stole a lot of bags in the minors, Masyn Winn. 43 steals in 2022, 32 back in 2021. He did that with really good success rates as well. So, yeah, for all the reasons you said, I expect the steals to come up. I think 270, 15 home runs, 30 steals is a possibility this season for Masyn Winn leading off for that Cardinals team. Scott, over to you, a breakout at shortstop.
This is one I haven't written about yet, but just to have this conversation about this player, I'm going to say Xavier Edwards of the Marlins.
Interesting.
Does your shirt have anything to do with it?
I wore this shirt in tribute to Xavier Edwards. I just wasn't sure what other position preview I could justify wearing a Marlins shirt. But Xavier Edwards came up last year, played 70 games, hit 328, stole 31 bases. You pace out that number of stolen bases over 150 games, it's 67. So elite base stealer, elite batting average source. In the minors, consistently an elite batting average guy. Prior to coming up and hitting 328 for Miami, he hit 330 for Jacksonville. The year before at Jacksonville, he hit 351. There is zero power here, and that profile rarely works in the majors anymore. It used to work all the time, but you don't see that Juan Pierre type of profile much anymore. And so I don't know that 70 games is enough to prove Xavier Edwards is going to be the exception to the rule, but the track record of hitting for that kind of average is clearly there. And he came up, got his first extended look in the majors, and continued to do it. So I think it's possible he'll be a unicorn for fantasy, somebody who can be a true A+ contributor in two critical categories, and might be a pretty good contributor in runs even in a bad lineup because he's batting leadoff. In Roto, his current ADP in Roto, I'm not sure I love the value. I'm not sure it's a pick. I'm not sure I'm willing to risk the downside of him just totally bottoming out for the upside of him being a standout in those two categories while contributing nothing in power. But what I want to stress here for Xavier Edwards is that even in points leagues, he looked like a stud for the time he was up. His average points per game was 3.46, which is the same basically point per game average as Elly De La Cruz. Obviously, points league's not Elly De La Cruz better format, but you get the idea. Xavier Edwards, if he picks up where he left off last year, would probably be a must start in points leagues. And that's the format where I see him just being completely overlooked. And I'll take a shot on him late. We'll see how it goes.
I thought about picking Xavier Edwards as my bust candidate.
I understand. I made the bust case within my breakout case.
Yeah, I think the bat's going to get knocked out of his hands. It's so like he had a 10% walk rate last year. That is so hard to do when you have so little power.
He walked a lot more in the in the minors for what it's worth. He was a high walk guy.
And the XBA was 252. And I think there's a chance he's almost nothing.
The ADP for Xavier Edwards, by the way, is 150. Should have mentioned for Mason Wynn, it's 195. But over at the NFBC, 159. So if you're drafting at NFBC, you're going to have to take Mason Wynn a little bit higher than maybe you would like. Scott, a bust at shortstop.
My bust pick at shortstop, we've already talked about as well. It's Willy Adames, who I think has virtually
a clean sweep, all three of us.
Virtually zero chance of repeating last year's numbers. And you say he's going 66th overall. That's fine. I don't want him there. He might slide to pick 90, and then it's a little hard to resist if he does that. Mm-hmm. But I still call him a bust.
To avoid being too redundant, I will say one, I think Zach Neto having shoulder surgery might have saved us from a really big mistake. Because I think he was going to be like a top 100 pick without the shoulder surgery, and now he's more like 170 or whatever. But
really, I
know, but now that I'm looking back into
Zach
it,
Neto all season, you guys were giving me grief because I was not the Zach Neto guy.
Now that I'm looking back into it, it's a 236 XBA. He outperformed his ex-WOBA by 13 points, which is not a huge number, but is something. And now he's probably not going to be ready for opening day, and he's still being drafted as a top 200 pick. Even in NFBC leagues, it's 177. I don't know let me see what it is since January 1st. Maybe it's gotten more reasonable, but that's usually the leagues that people are really hesitant to take any injury risk. And we're just okay with a mid-round. I mean, that's a mid-round pick in a 15-team league on a guy
what's the number?
It's 195 since January 1st. Ooh, so
that's late though, Chris.
It's pretty late, but in a 15-team league.
Well, let's assume not a 15-team.
That's like a 13. Right, but that's what a 13th round pick in a 15-team league, which is that's where he's being drafted in NFBC leagues. And so that's a lot for a guy who is coming back from shoulder surgery, may not be ready for opening day, and is not going to have spring training. It might just be a completely lost season, even if he does play. How often do we see that?
It could be, but I think I don't know. Like pick 200. I understand in a 15-team league, pick 200 is only like halfway through the draft, but in the sort of leagues we normally talk about, it's pretty late, and it's pretty late for a guy who put up a 249, 23, 77, 70, 30 line last year. I think Zach Neto has a better chance of repeating Zach Neto's line last year than Willy Adames has of repeating Zach Neto's line last year.
If he wasn't coming back from shoulder surgery, I could maybe see the case that he would overperform,
and that's a risk factor
that's
for sure.
Tough.
But the actual timeline is that he might only miss a week or two. So
maybe.
Yeah, it could go the other way. He could suffer setback after setback and miss half the season, or he could be back after a week or two.
I think the biggest thing is just you can't predict injuries. You shouldn't draft guys who are already less than 100%.
But if he's going 100 picks later because of the injury risk, like that's at some point the concern becomes an opportunity.
Well, I'm also arguing that maybe he shouldn't have been going, that he was being overdrafted before we found out about the injury anyway.
Yeah. And the shoulder injury, for someone who doesn't have just big raw power too, I mean, that kind of scares me a little bit. Huge left-right splits too, like crushes lefties OPS over 1,000, sub 700 OPS against righties too. It's just
2 years in a row. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't. The Fantasy Pros ADP is 165, so even higher than.
I don't believe what's happened here. I don't believe how the script has flipped. I've gone from being the Zach Neto hater to the Zach Neto lover.
Scott,
you missed it. You missed the time to jump on the bandwagon.
Maybe you guys missed it. Pick 200 is when you want them.
Consistency is the hobgoblin of feeble minds. So said, I don't know, Oscar Wilde or one of those old guys. I don't know who said it.
What is a hobgoblin anyway?
Most
little guy.
Most likely to draft. Just give me a name. Most likely to draft at shortstop.
It's not Bo Bichette for Scott because I got there first.
Oh.
He's a top 75 player for me. It's Bo Bichette. Yeah.
Scott.
Yeah, Bo Bichette. I already said it. You're not listening.
I heard you. I'm just saying you can't.
It's just not
true.
true.
Me a chance to change my answer because you don't want me to steal Chris's, but I got there first. Okay.
All right. Back in.
I'm the one who gets there first.
I have seen a lot of mock drafts where Chris gets Bo Bichette. So,
where do you ranked?
Uh-oh. Are we gonna?
Where do I have Bo Bichette ranked?
Are we gonna have a rank off right
now? Hang on. I'll get there. Bo Bichette, I have him ranked. No, I don't.
71st.
Oh, you do have him higher. Okay.
Oh, I'm looking at my points league rankings.
Yeah. He's 75 for me, so you do have him higher. Okay. All right. You can have, I pulled Bo Bichette.
It said 122, and I was like, no, I don't. I'm arguing with my own rankings.
You pulled rank on me. I'll go with Corey Seager.
Okay, we have 10 minutes to figure out the rest of shortstop ADP, so let's do this. We left off with Bo Bichette going just after him, Ezequiel Tovar at 132, Anthony Volpe at 133. Tovar took a step forward, 269, 26 home runs, good counting stats. He's a good defender. He's going to play every day. The plate discipline is awful, but he has Coors Field to help mitigate some of that strikeout rate. And then Anthony Volpe, traded in some power for contact last season, got off to that great start. Final 4 months were really bad, a sub 600 OPS for Volpe. And then he turned things on in the postseason, and he looked a lot better. Scott, you're out.
These are the two most overdrafted shortstops, bar none. Anthony Volpe, Ezequiel Tovar. They both, to me, are one category standouts. If you want to be nitpicky, you could say 2 category standouts, but that's it. They're going to hurt you and everything else, and there are much better values later and much more promising players later, such as Dansby Swanson and Xander Bogaerts. And I'm even going to say Zach Neto. Mm-hmm. I'd rather have them all than Anthony Volpe and Ezequiel Tovar.
They are better in a 15-team roto league than a 12-team points league, certainly, because they are really safe playing time projections. They have advantageous lineup spots. Like Anthony Volpe might hit leadoff, and he has scored 90 runs last year. And
that's the second category when I say
that's already
want to get nitpicky.
Well, and that's already baked in, right? Like he scored 90 runs last year. I don't think he's going to do significantly better. I do wonder, are we not being fair to the 23-year-old former top prospect? The problem is there were reasons to think he was maybe overrated as a prospect, and those reasons.
Which one are you talking about? Are you still talking about Volpe?
Yeah, but Volpe in particular, yes. I guess it could apply to both, but Volpe in particular, there were some red flags in his contact profile and his batting average skills in the minors. The power, there's no reason to believe the power's coming. Maybe it will, but he had to sell out hard for it as a rookie. He stopped selling out for it in his second season, and it's not like he started hitting for batting average. So yeah, I want to be fair and not give up on him entirely. I don't have anything concrete to point to.
Yeah, and look, I don't want to put too much value on the playoffs because it's just a small sample size, but Volpe did look like a different player. He had 10 walks to 13 strikeouts, a 407 on base percentage. He had 10 runs scored, 5 steals. He looked a lot better, so we'll see if he could build off that. He's kind of been 2 different players his first 2 seasons, so maybe he kind of blends some of those skills together, but yeah, you're right. All right, we dropped down a little bit. Xavier Edwards, ADP of.
Can I say one last thing about Tovar?
Yes.
He had 200 strikeouts and 23 walks last year.
The plate discipline is even in a deeper points league, I think he's unusable.
I didn't realize he got to 200 strikeouts. That's wild.
Yeah. Xavier Edwards, we spoke about Scott likes him as a breakout. Chris a little bit more hesitant there with an ADP of 150. We dropped down.
And to be clear, I prefaced it by saying I haven't written about Edwards as a breakout. I just think it's a good opportunity to have the conversation.
We also spoke about Zach Neto, whose ADP is 165.5. I don't know that there's anything else to say. You guys have touched on it. Look, the lefty-righty splits coming back from the shoulder surgery, 165. Yes, you are getting a discount. I think, his October ADP before we knew about this surgery was like a top 100, top 80 pick or something like that. So you're getting a big discount here. It's a bad lineup. I don't really know what to do. In a shallower league, I guess you can take a shot on Neto and hope he returns healthy at some point. 4 names in the 175 to 200 range. Cedar Rafaela, 177. Dansby Swanson at 187. Jeremy Pena at 190. Mason Wynn at 195. So 2 names here, Chris, we have not talked about yet. Cedar Rafaela, who, when I was looking into the skill set, I don't know that there's a huge difference between him and Volpe, and you're getting him 50 picks later than where Volpe's going. And then Jeremy Pena, who just kind of feels like a high floor, 15-15, doesn't really hurt you. Maybe he's like a deep league middle infielder type.
Yeah, the thing that's tough about Cedar Rafaela is out of 252 players who qualified for this specific leaderboard, he had the 45th lowest WOBA, and he outperformed his WOBA, his expected WOBA, by like 15 points. That's really hard to do, to be that bad and outperform. I don't know if the skill, the point about Volpe, I guess, is a decent point, but Volpe I guess the stolen base attempts were close. Rafaela got caught 10 times on 29 attempts. I think the playing time and lineup spot are better for Volpe.
Yep.
And so that's a big thing. Rafaela, he feels like a pretty fringe major league offensive player. Defense should keep him around, but I'm not sure it's enough to keep him in the lineup.
Yeah, it's not like elite defense like it was advertised to be. It was good, just not quite as high end as it sounded. And Rafaela would seem like he's the last line of resistance for maybe both Christian Campbell and Roman Anthony. So if he's not killing it, he might just be out of the lineup once those two are ready to go.
Well, and Marcelo Meyer.
Yeah, not to mention him. Yeah,
that's the thing is they've got 3 top 20 prospects beaten down the door. They've all been to AAA already, and they're all able to play the positions that Cedar Rafaela plays. So I don't know. He could take a step forward. His minor league production was better than his. Yeah,
but even then. Yeah, it was good minor league production, but in a way that you can get away with in the minors because his chase is so bad. He had the highest chase rate among 129 major leaguers last year. The highest chase rate. He also had the 7th lowest, I should say, zone contact rate. So he chased a lot out of the zone and he missed a lot in the zone. And he doesn't have big time power. It just doesn't seem like a first division regular, at least on the offensive side for Cedar Rafaela.
All right.
Bust for me.
2 names going between 200 and 260. I mean, this is where you kind of see depth fall off a little bit because only 2 names between 200 and 260. So it's getting a little bit more scarce here. But Tyler Fitzgerald at 236, Carlos Correa at 254. Both of you guys like Carlos Correa. Scott, I feel like you might be a Tyler Fitzgerald optimist. Am I right about that?
I want to be because literally nobody else is. I'll admit that when I look at the data, it's hard to be. So to have this conversation, Tyler Fitzgerald was legitimately awesome from the time he joined the Giants lineup. He played 96 games in all, 15 homers, 17 steals, a 280 batting average. That is pacing at over 150 games, a 25 homer, 29 steal pace. His plate discipline was horrendous, struck out way too much, a rate that's prohibitive for guys who impact the ball really hard. And Tyler Fitzgerald absolutely isn't a guy who impacts the ball very hard. So the batting average doesn't make sense. The power production doesn't make sense. 100th percentile sprint speed. So the speed makes sense, but he's got to hit enough to take advantage of that speed. The reason I don't feel like I can write Tyler Fitzgerald off completely is look at his minor league track record.
Yeah.
Like
he was old. Yeah. The minor league track record's really good.
Really power, speed. He did everything down there too. So I can't really explain it. And I'm, again, my natural inclination is seeing the data for Fitzgerald, which is just awful all around, except for the sprint speed, to dismiss it. But if he's there at the very end of my draft, I might throw a pick his way just to see.
The one thing I would say is like there is some evidence of him doing the Marcus Semien, Isaac Paredes one simple trick to like he pulls the ball. His pull rate is 50%. His line drive rate is 25%. His fly ball rate is 33%. Like the problem is those guys have excellent plate discipline and excellent bat control. And Tyler Fitzgerald, it's weird because he swings and misses a ton. His in-zone contact rate was 75.3%. That's really bad. There's a stat called launch angle sweet spot, which is how often you hit the ball at like ideal degrees of launch angle. And that was 90th percentile. And so those are the things that's hard to reconcile for me, because that's like, well, okay, when he makes contact, it seems like the bat control is pretty good. He seems to hit the ball in the directions that he wants. It's just, but he misses when he swings so much.
That's one red bar on his StatCast page, other than sprint speed, is that launch angle sweet spot.
That's what I'm trying to find an explanation for how he could like be a poor man's Marcus Semien. And it might come with a 230 batting average but like, I do think there could be 2020 potential here.
And that would be great for this cost. And by the way, he's supposed to play second base this year. So Tyler Fitzgerald would be picking up eligibility at the weakest position. It can't be ignored for the price. If there was any enthusiasm for him at all, I'd be out. But since there's none, might take a flyer on Tyler Fitzgerald.
Let's move on to two names going between 270 and 300. Trevor Story, 273. Ha-Sung Kim, 291. If Trevor Story did not have bad luck, he would have no luck at all. He has played 94 games or less each of his first 3 seasons with the Red Sox. Dealt with a bunch more last year. I believe it was it shoulder surgery, I believe.
He separated his shoulder like really early in the season.
Yeah, and then missed basically all of the season. But if he's healthy, projects to be a starting everyday player for the Red Sox. And then Ha-Sung Kim signed with the Tampa Bay Rays. He had shoulder surgery this offseason, likely to miss the first month. Once he returns in May, expected to be the starting shortstop for the Rays. Chris, anything here with Trevor Story or Ha-Sung Kim, maybe deep league middle infielder?
Not so much with Kim, just because I think he's a pretty fringe player before having shoulder surgery, pretty fringe hitter. Trevor Story, let's just do the same thing we've done each of the previous 2 off seasons. Since getting to Boston, he has now played 163 games across 3 seasons. In those 163 games, I'll remind you, a baseball season is 162 games. So he's basically played 1 full season. 21 homers, 29 steals, 90 RBI, 73 runs. It's a 232 batting average. That's pretty terrible, but that's a starting caliber player in a roto league, even with the bad batting average. So look, I think it's unlikely you get much of anything from Trevor Story, but with your last pick or a bench pick, whatever, who cares? Throw it out there and see what happens. There are a lot of players who have some upside in that range. So I'm not going to say he's the only one you should draft. I think I'd rather just throw the flyer at Jordan Lawler and see if he gets called up early or cracks the opening day roster. But if you're talking about versus Ha-Sung Kim, I'd rather take the chance on Trevor Story.
Some names in the 350 to 400 range: Luis Angel Acuna, Jordan Lawler, Jacob Wilson, Brooks Lee. Scott, some top prospects, some post-hype-ish prospects here. Any that catch your attention?
I mean, Lawler's the most interesting, who Chris already mentioned. I think He should replace Perdomo in Arizona. It probably would have already happened if he didn't miss most of last season with injury, but he looked fine when he was healthy again at AAA and has kind of that Marcus Semien profile where Marcus Semien profile back when he used to run a lot. Lawler, speed, could eke out 20, 25 homers by pulling the ball a lot. Batting average might be 260-ish, but he's been a top 10 prospect for several years in a row now, and I think this year eventually will finally be Jordan Lawler's time. I'm not that interested in any of the others. Jacob Wilson hit like 430 at AAA last year, but a zero power guy and not great plate discipline either. He's going to start for the Athletics, so the playing time will be there. I'm just skeptical he's going to amount to much in fantasy.
It's one of those ones where, like, man, if he could steal 15 bases,
Mm-hmm.
It's very Luis Arias, the whole profile.
Yeah, I think that's the optimum comp for Wilson. If he optimizes the skill set, he's Luis Arias.
Yeah.
Brooks Lee might be the starting second baseman for the Twins and was a prospect of pretty high standing, but I don't see a lot in the data to get excited about. I'm pretty skeptical about Brooks Lee as well.
Outside the top 400, J.P. Crawford, Orlando Arcia, Brian Rocchio, Geraldo Perdomo, Trey Sweeney. Any of these names matter?
And in AL and NL only, yes. Outside of that, no.
I think the most interesting name outside of the top 400 is a guy you're about to talk about, so we'll punt on that one.
The prospects to know, we mentioned Acuna and Lawler and Jacob Wilson. There's Marcelo Meyer, who could be up at some point for the Red Sox. Maybe Sebastian Walcott late in the season. And then there's also Carson Williams with the Tampa Bay Rays and Colson Montgomery with the White Sox.
Montgomery's the guy I was referring to outside the top 400. He took a really big step back last year at AAA, but has been a prospect of note for a little while. And the runway's completely clear in Chicago. That's the nice thing about a bad team is whatever interesting players they've got are probably going to get an opportunity if he's not a total disaster at spring training. So Colson Montgomery, certainly a name to watch in spring training and a name who could become a pretty interesting late round sleeper as spring goes on.
All right, we're going to wrap there. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.